G'day guys, I am going to show you through my 10 items and how I think they went. So I've just come out of the bush. It's about 2 days after I was pulled out on day 64. And I'm going to talk you through the 10 items that I took and how happy I am. I'm just going to show you where I am. I'm in Tasmania in Hobart, basically at a recovery house. You know, nothing special, just a rented house. It's pretty bright and sunny. I'm having to shoot this on my mobile phone because I don't have my camera equipment with me because it wasn't actually my equipment. I was using someone else's, but so she's going to be a little rough. So I'm going to talk you through the 10 items and tell you how happy I was with the choice and how well I thought the individual item that I bought performed. To start with, the sleeping bag. This is probably the thing I'm most critical of. It was the right decision, of course, to take a sleeping bag. I actually did consider not taking one. But it didn't take me long to, you know, go through the idea that it just wouldn't be worth the freezing nights, shivering away with my down pants and all the other stuff on. So I decided to take one. And what I took was this Wander, I think at the Grand Tour. I'll put a link in the description, but basically, I'm just going to pull it out. It's really big, stand by. So I was not happy with this sleeping bag for one main reason, and that is it does not breathe. When I look at this is the sack that it comes in. I'm actually quite suspicious that the material, this canvas here, is the same as the canvas from the sleeping bag. This is non-porous plastic sealed canvas, which I think is completely unsuitable to make a sleeping bag outer cover from, because it does not breathe at all. The bottom as well does not breathe at all. And the problem with that is moisture that leaves your body, even when you're cold, cannot escape. So it recondenses when it gets close to the outside of the bag, and the bag gets wet. The only way the moisture could escape was through the seam here, and this here and here, for a distance of about 5 centimeters, became saturated with water after a couple of days. Other than that terrible design flaw, the shape of the bag is not ideal. Now, I actually chose this bag because it is large and comfortable. Now, that's large and comfortable really doesn't matter that much normally, but it was going to be a long time. And mummy bags, the mummy style bags, which have a narrow foot, that basically come down to like a mummy kind of style and then go out like a, I don't know, they just go out in a triangular shape. They are less comfortable to be in, but I thought I could be in this thing for several months, so I may as well go for a big one. The problem with this shape is, if you've got your feet here and you've managed to warm up the area of the sleeping bag where your feet are, and you roll over and then your feet move over to this side, then you've basically got to completely reheat this side so your feet stay colder for longer. And with the lower metabolic rate that I had, my body was not heating my extremities much, so I had cold feet in this bag. Otherwise, it's a little annoying the way it seals around the top, because this material is so stiff that it doesn't actually compact like the normal hood of a softer down style sleeping bag, and so there's more drafts that end up getting through the elastic that you can tighten and pull into, like, yeah, a big kind of like enclosure around your head. So overall, it was the right choice to take a bag. In Australia, I could not get anything better than this, believe it or not, in a synthetic bag. I actually bought another bag that had a lower rating, and when it arrived, I decided it was too thin, so I actually went with this 2 days before I had to commit, because the other one was not thick enough. So it was the best thing I could source in Australia in the time. So that's one of the reasons as well that I'm probably not happy with it, but anyway, you get that. All right, let's have a look at the other stuff. So I took 150 meters of 10 pound is what I took, because we had a 300 meter allowance, and we could take 2 line classes. So I took half 10 pound, thin 10 pound, and half thick 20 pound. That was a good choice. The most useful thing ended up being the 20 pound line, because the eels snapped off the 10 pound. So when I was fishing for eels, I had to use 20 pound. The trout would take the 20 pound. It probably did walk a few trout off, but I couldn't afford, because they basically eat the same bait, to use anything less than 20, because I would lose an eel in that case. I did use the 10 pound for the spinning, so it was a good choice. It's yeah, it was suitable. I could cast fairly well with the improvised reel and rod that I made, so that was a good choice. And the hooks, I had a good assortment of hooks. The sizing was appropriate. I had some smaller hooks, some small hooks that I was going to create flies, some dry flies from, and they, it's a bit of a long story. Initially we were told that all our hooks had to be barbless, so I chopped the barbs off, and then the rules changed. It's not the fault of the production, it's just the authorising authority allowed us an increase in the rules, so we could now have barbs, and I wasn't able to source. I did order the hooks, but they didn't arrive in time. One thing about the hooks that I took a couple of different size hooks. The fly hooks were okay, but it is nice to have a hook that has a little barbs on the back of the shaft which hold bait in position. So when you put a worm on there, the worm will kind of be up nicely on the hook. If you don't have that and you just use a fly tying hook, the bait does slip down into the bottom of the hook and probably doesn't present as well to the fish. So those are some important considerations. And I'd probably rather use those to tie a fly with, because you can still tie a fly on a hook with bait barbs if you need to. As it turned out, fly fishing turned up nothing anyway for me. Okay, next, the wire that I took. I thought that was a good choice. I took 20 gauge wire, and I specifically took 2 different softnesses. One was quite soft, it was, which is this one. It was soft and pliable, quite good, and ended up being suitable as a tripwire. More suitable than bankline, because bankline stretched, and I ended up not getting a paddy melon, because the paddy melon, which is a little kangaroo kind of thing, it pushed down the tripwire, the line stretched, and the trap didn't go off. I was reticent to use wire initially, but I switched to wire, and that ended up working. So the wire was incredibly useful for a whole range of things. It's a very good product, and I'm very glad I took it. All right. Next we got the Ferro Rod, and it's Überleben Ferro Rod. It was very good. It's really nice and thick. Basically, I'd get my fires going generally between 1 and 3 strikes. Stringy bark is an excellent thing to strike into. You'll notice that I replaced the black elastic cord with this immediately when I got out there with red paracord. That's in case I dropped this. I'd never carry this around on me because it was too important to lose. I was very careful where I hung it, but it was a good solid ferro rod to use, and I don't have any regrets taking it. It was worth it. I can start a fire without matches many ways with friction, but being Tasmania, the difficulties of doing that with the dry wood is so hard to find. It was a good choice. The striker on the ferro rod is, believe it or not, a very important piece of equipment. It's not just a straight piece of steel. It has this edge on it, a little barbed edge. It's like a hooked edge. It's hard to see, but it's a tiny little triangular shape of steel there that it sticks up. You can get much greater size sparks with this. So you can use the back of the knife, it's okay. You can use a saw, but by having the useful striker there, it is very handy. That 5 centimeters on the back, that ruler, I use that a lot just because we had environmental restrictions for the width of trees we could cut and things like that. And so I ended up really using this 5 centimeters and making a ruler, an extended ruler on the side of my net. I didn't use the other functions on here like can opener and stuff, but that was nice to have as well. So thumbs up to my ferro rod. Personally, I think ferro rods are a silly tool for survival. If you were going to make a survival kit, take a cigarette lighter. It's far easier to use. You can use it single-handed. If you're injured, anyone in your family can use it. You don't need the skills and, to be honest, stuff around of using a ferro rod. But we only had the choice of a ferro rod, no other fire lighting tool. This one was a good one. Leatherman. We could take the case. So this is the Leatherman P4 Free. Overall, pretty good. The tip of the knife snapped off when I was building something. I knew I was taking a risk. You can see it's just kind of busted off there. I ended up sharpening it, so it was okay. It is a slightly weak tip, but there is some advantages to that, the smallness of it, so it's all right. It's a fairly comfortable Leatherman to hold. Now, that is a big factor. There's other Leathermans like the G10 Charge that I was going to take. It's a long story why I didn't take that. I won't go into it, but with that one to hold is very harsh on your thumb. You're going to be doing a lot of whittling if you're going alone. You need a nice flat surface on the back here so you can comfortably hold this thing. When I did a lot of whittling, I wore my gloves anyway, just because of that comfortable factor, and also just the safety aspects of if I do make a mistake and go that it's not going to cut my other hand by wearing gloves. The one-handed nature of it is actually a very useful tool to be able to handle a tool single-handed, because I might be, when I was setting those traps, I might realise in the middle of it I'm holding all this weight of this trap and this net trap beneath me, and I realise I've got to cut something. I can reach down, holding something in my teeth, reach into my pocket, pull it out single-handed and cut something, or pull out some pliers and tweak something, put it back in my pocket. You know, like, that is single-handed operation is an attribute to a multi-tool that should not be overlooked. Other stuff on here was pretty good. I really would like it if it had a diamonds sharpening tool properly. That is a real bonus if you can have one that has that. But otherwise, good job on the P4. I was happy enough with it. Paracord. So we could have 80 meters of paracord. This is stuff, some leftover stuff that I've taken the fibers out of. It was an excellent choice. I'm glad I took multicolors. We were allowed to, because I could use the brightness of it to highlight certain things, use it on fishing lures if I wanted to do darker stuff. So it was more camouflaged. I used the black like I did for the traps. So that was useful. And I obviously minimized cutting it as much as I could so I could repurpose it. And this bit of blue string got repurposed about, who knows, countless times. So it's good. The inner cords that you can strip out of it, I made nets with. So, for example, this enormous net here, this is the inner cord, and basically there's 21 of those crammed into the outer sheath. So the outer sheath itself is very useful, and the inner parts of it are useful as well. Mind you, it's very difficult to work with stuff. The inner cords are very difficult to work with when you split them down into their lowest form. So paracord, definitely worth taking. Happy with what I got. I sourced mine from Bunnings, the hardware store in Australia. There's many types of paracord when you buy it, and they don't all have the same amount of strands. Believe it or not, the expensive stuff from that I ordered about 4 different types of paracord just to compare them all, and the best one was the Bunnings one, because it had 21 strands. Some of them had like 14 inner strands, and they all said that they were 5 mil, but overall they weren't, and some of the other ones were thinner. So if you're going to go on alone, or you're going to have some paracord in your survival kit, it is worth having a look at what's available. Everything will fit the same description when you order it, but you'll end up with some different products, and they can make the difference between, you know, being able to extract a large amount of use from them, or just perhaps a little bit less. Okay, axe. This is the axe. It's an excellent axe. Basically, this cover that's coming off it, it came off at the start, and it really never went back on the whole show. I just left the head off it. Yep, there's safety considerations by not having the head on the axe. I was very careful about it. I'd never cut myself on the axe. And I saved myself a lot of energy not having to go through that rigmarole, taking the cover off it. Yes, I'm sure some axe guru will have a whinge, but I saved a lot of calories and my efficiency was greatly improved. Anyway, it's a great axe. The head never wobbled. The axe, the handle itself was strong. These are one of the most popular axes. Grunsfors Swedish brand. Mostly this is a Carpenters axe, so that mostly flattened head was very useful because it allows you to cut things in a fairly square shape. It's really good for slicing as well. This little gap here allows you to hold your hand in quite tight when you're using it for slicing. It's got the hammer back, good size, not too little, not too big. There was times I wished it was smaller, there was times I wished it was bigger. This size, which has a 50 centimeter handle, was good. It's not a curved handle, it's a symmetrical handle. Doesn't really bother me too much. Your hands will adjust to whatever it needs to be. So, good axe. Saw, the Katana Boy, Sufix Boy, whatever they call it. Silky, it's backwards to me, I'm reading it off my phone screen, but the 65 centimeter Silky Katana saw, that's a big saw. It was a big decision to take such a big saw, and you know, I was humming and hawing. In the end, this was the best choice, and I wouldn't change the size of the saw because it's so wet there. Firewood kind of had to be cut, so I had to cut through big trees all the time for firewood, which in Australia is normally just a ridiculous waste of effort. But in those conditions where I had to collect dry wood from the inner surfaces of dead standing trees, it was excellent. Plus the fact that I was basically doing carpentry and making my own planks. And so you have to cut around like a nice flat surface to be able to create those. So that was a really good sized saw. You can see the blade did cop a bit of rust. It's out there for 64 days. Most of that rust gets scraped off when you cut through a big tree. And I was rubbing, whenever my hands were dirty, when I'd been, covered in oil from oil fat, I'd lick all the oil off my hands, and whatever was left I'd rub on the blade. It does need a bit of the head's a little bit sticky. When you pull the thing out, it's getting stickier. It needs a squirt of oil just in that front hinge there. But it was an excellent saw. I'm very glad I took it. A cooking pot, cast iron pot. I've used pots like this before, camp ovens I call them. That was a really excellent size. I'm really happy. It's still got some eel fat in it, this thing. I've scraped it with my fingers so many times because I was starving, but you can still see the gleam of eel fat in there. The size is really quite good. And this handle was really important for being, I bent it so I can actually remove it. And I could use that as a hot poker to melt through my tarp when I was making my kayak. So I was able to improvise stuff out of that. The stuff doesn't stick to it. Once you get some fat in there, things were not sticking to it. So yeah, really happy with that pot. And I'm glad I took that over like a stainless steel smaller pot that might be lighter, might be easy to go down and collect water or something like that. And so there's some advantages to a lighter pot, but there's also advantages to having a heavier pot. The lid, I was going to use the lid as a fry pan, but I just decided to use the bottom of the pot as a fry pan instead because there was less chance of fat or anything, you know, spitting out the side. I needed every single tiny piece of spitting oil to go into my mouth and not get spat out sideways into the fire. It was also useful for food storage. So when I cook my food, this is a nice sturdy pot, I put the food back in here and store it, and then there's much less chance that an animal like a koala or a mouse is going to get in there and steal it. So that was also a function that I hadn't considered, which was quite useful. Finally, for 10 items, was my spare tarp. Now here, this is actually part of the tarp that I took, my spare 12 by 12 tarp. Once again, just from Bunnings. Silver on one side, green on the other. And I've turned this into a net basically. I don't know if it gets shown on the show or not, but after trying to trap paddy melons, I finally got a paddy melon into my trap, but it broke through the net that I'd made from the inner strands of Paracord. And I thought, I was like, you know, what else can I do? I've used all my materials. And then I basically came up with the idea that I could slit the net a certain way and pull it out and create a net from it. And it was a good idea. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to stay out there long enough for it to actually hatch a paddy melon, but it would have got one because it was the same trap under the same settings, and I'm sure that that would have held it. So a tarp is a really important multi-use item, and I made a kayak out of it. I used it for all sorts of things. I use it as a basis for skinning eels. When my metabolism slowed down and my bag was full of condensation, I used it as a space blanket by being able to turn it over and use the long wave radiation that leaves your body was reflected back towards me by the silverness of the tarpaulin. I used it to cover stuff for rain. I used the offcuts from the kayak to make a chair. I made a plate out of it. I used the colour of it for lures. I used threads out of it to tie things. I used it to wrap stuff. I used it to cover the camera at times. One of the secondary cameras, when I went out kayaking, I'd have to put the camera down somewhere, and it was always raining there, and so I'd just put a little scrap of tarp over it. Like, there's just so many uses. It was a really good decision to take spare tarp. It's kind of I feel it's an unusual decision in many ways, but yeah, it was a good decision. So overall, I'm very happy with the 10 items that I took, and the brands I took. I was generally happy with everything except for the sleeping bag. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'm going to now jump into the next video on the clothing that I took, and there's quite a bit of info to come out of that as well. So if you haven't seen that one, make sure you watch that video as well. Thanks for listening.